The 22nd of June, 1941. With 134 divisions at full fighting strength and 73 more divisions for deployment behind the front, Nazi Germany, under the codename Operation Barbarossa, invades the Soviet Union, its ally in the war against Poland. Hitler considers the invasion as part of his plan to provide the German nation with Lebensraum, meaning living space, and an opportunity to destroy communism, which he loathes. The Soviet Union sees catastrophic military losses, and millions of its soldiers fall into German captivity, where they are subjected to starvation, disease, and brutal treatment. Thousands of them decide to switch sides, join the German army, and fight against Stalin and his regime. One of the highest-ranking Soviet military officers to collaborate with Nazi Germany is Major General Sergei Bunyachenko. Sergei Kuzmich Bunyachenko was born to a poor peasant family of Ukrainian origin on the 5th of October 1902 in the village of Korovyakovka, then part of the Russian Empire. In April 1918, at just 15 years old, he joined the Red Army and fought as an infantryman in the Russian Civil War. In 1919, Bunyachenko became a member of the Communist Party, and in 1923, he graduated from the Odessa Military Academy. After graduation, he was assigned to fight against the Basmachi Revolt, which was a rebellion by Muslim fighters in Central Asia resisting Soviet rule to preserve their traditional way of life and religious practices. From 1932 to 1935, Bunyachenko studied at the Frunze Military Academy in Moscow, one of the Soviet Union's most prestigious military schools. However, in 1937, Bunyachenko was almost expelled from the Communist Party for criticizing agricultural collectivization policies conducted by the Soviet Union, especially in Ukraine. The collectivization efforts led to the forced consolidation of individual peasant farms into large state-controlled enterprises. This policy caused widespread disruption to traditional farming practices, leading to a significant drop in agricultural productivity. The most devastating result was the Holodomor, a man-made famine from 1932 to 1933, which resulted in the deaths of millions of Ukrainians. Bunyachenko's criticism stemmed from witnessing these severe hardships, including starvation, loss of property, and the suppression of Ukrainian cultural and religious practices. Although Bunyachenko initially faced expulsion from the Communist Party for his criticism of agricultural collectivization, in the end he avoided it and received a strong warning instead. In 1938, Bunyachenko was appointed the Assistant Chief of the Staff of the 39th Rifle Corps and fought at the Battle of Lake Kazan, which was a military conflict between the Soviet Union and Japan over a disputed border area near Lake Kazan on the Soviet-Manchurian border. The Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Poland found itself fighting a two-front war when it was invaded by the Soviet Union from the east on the 17th of September. Warsaw officially surrendered to the Germans on the 28th of September, and one day later, in accordance with a secret protocol to their non-aggression pact, Germany and the Soviet Union partitioned Poland. On Sunday, the 22nd of June 1941, under the codename Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. 3 million German soldiers were reinforced by Finnish, Romanian, Hungarian, Italian, Slovak, and Croatian troops. Within weeks, German divisions conquered the Baltic republics of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. For Nazi Germany, this attack was not an ordinary military operation. The war against the Soviet Union was a war of annihilation between German fascism and Soviet communism, a racial war between German Aryans and subhuman Slavs and Jews. During World War II, Bunyachenko held the rank of colonel in the Red Army, and starting in March 1942, he commanded the 389th Infantry Division on the Transcaucasian Front. During the defensive battles in August 1942, he was ordered to blow up a bridge over the Terek River in the North Caucasus region of Russia. However, some of his soldiers could not get across the bridge in time, so Bunyachenko chose not to destroy it to save his men. As a result, he was arrested and put on trial. In September 1942, a military tribunal sentenced Bunyachenko to death. Later, his sentence was reduced to 10 years in a gulag, to be served after the war, and he was reinstated as an officer. Bunyachenko then became the commander of the 59th Rifle Brigade, which had already lost over 35% of its troops in combat before he took command. By November 1942, the brigade was nearly wiped out, and Bunyachenko was blamed for the loss and faced the threat of a new arrest. In December 1942, he was captured in the North Caucasus region by the reconnaissance group of the 2nd Romanian Infantry Division, and spent the period from January to June 1943 in prisoner-of-war camps. Whilst there, Bunyachenko became familiar with the anti-Soviet views of Andrey Vlasov, a decorated Soviet general who had defected to the Germans in 1942. Vlasov made several trips to the German-occupied Soviet Union, where he lectured Russian prisoners of war about his position on Bolshevism and Stalin. He explained to them that their government had declared them all traitors and that escaping was pointless. He added that, even if the Soviets succeeded, Stalin would send them to Siberia. He hoped to create the Russian Liberation Army, which would fight against the Red Army alongside the Germans. However, Hitler repeatedly refused to even consider the idea. As a result, initially this army existed only on paper, and was used by the Germans to encourage Red Army troops to surrender. The Nazi propaganda department issued Russian Liberation Army patches to Russian volunteers, and tried to use Vlasov's name to encourage defections. Several 100,000 former Soviet citizens served in the German army wearing this patch, but never under Vlasov's own command. Only in 1944 did Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS, aware of Germany's shortage of manpower, finally convince Hitler to establish a Russian Liberation Army. Vlasov was put in charge, and the new army consisted of 10 grenadier divisions, a tank unit, and its own air force. Bunyachenko was one of the thousands of Soviet prisoners of war who decided to join the Russian Liberation Army and fight alongside the Nazis against the Allies. On the 6th of June 1944, under the code name Operation Overlord, US, British, and Canadian troops crossed the English Channel and began landing on the beaches of Normandy and France. In the weeks following the Allied invasion, Bunyachenko assembled a combined regiment from Eastern Volunteer battalions and managed to delay the advance of Allied forces in the area of Saint-Lô, in the northwest of France. For his actions on the Western Front, Bunyachenko was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. In November 1944, he was promoted to commander of the 1st Infantry Division of the Russian Liberation Army, leading a total of 20,000 soldiers and auxiliary personnel. In February 1945, Bunyachenko was promoted to Major General and moved to the Eastern Front. In mid-April, he participated in Operation April Weather, an effort to defend the Oder River, which today marks the German-Polish border from the advancing Red Army. When the operation failed, Bunyachenko ordered his troops to withdraw and move to Prague, in German-controlled Bohemia. On the 6th of May, 1945, Bunyachenko sent a request to Vlasov, asking for permission to turn his weapons against the Nazi SS forces and aid Czech resistance fighters in the Prague Uprising. Vlasov initially disapproved, but then reluctantly allowed the 1st Division to proceed, possibly to win favor from the Western Allies and secure a better post-war position. On the 12th of May, Bunyachenko learned that the American forces would not accept the official surrender of his division, so he disbanded it, and on the 15th of May he and his troops surrendered to the Americans. However, due to an agreement between the Soviet and American governments, all Soviet citizens, including Bunyachenko and his men, were handed over to Soviet custody as prisoners of war. From the 30th to the 31st of July, 1946, a close trial was held against Bunyachenko, Vlasov, and 10 of their followers. However, the decision to sentence them to death had already been made by the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party 1 week prior. They were all found guilty of high treason, stripped of their military ranks, and their property was confiscated. Sergei Bunyachenko was 43 years old when on the 1st of August 1946, he, along with other convicted commanders, was led into a prison yard in Moscow. For their collaboration with the Nazis, a decision was made to prolong their suffering to an unbearable limit. Therefore, all 12 men were brought to the gallows simultaneously by the Russian executioners, who tightened a very thin but strong rope around their necks. They did not drop them to break their necks, but instead stood them on boxes, which were then taken away from under their feet. Bunyachenko and the others suffered and choked for long minutes before they died. The bodies of the executed were then cremated, and the ashes were dumped into one of the unmarked graves at the Donskoy Cemetery in Moscow, where the ashes of those executed as enemies of the people had been dumped for decades during the Soviet rule. Thanks for watching the World History channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.